Diamond for diamond, no one compares with Mervis. At Mervis Diamond Importers, our natural diamonds come straight from the mines in Africa, and our mermaid lab-grown diamonds beat all others for quality and value. Come view our brilliant diamonds, both natural and lab-grown. Mervis diamonds are so bright and full of fire they will blow you away. So will the affordable prices. Our diamonds may steal your heart, but not your wallet. See our mermaid lab-grown diamonds and learn how to get a larger diamond for less. You can get a bigger mermaid lab-grown diamonds than you ever thought possible. And with Mervis financing, you can enjoy up to 5 years to pay with zero interest. Our generous full-value trader policy and our lifetime warranty program easily make Mervis your first choice. When you mount a world-class Mervis diamond into a designer ring from our huge collection, there is no equal. Mervis Diamond Importers. For an appointment, call 800-HER-LOVE or go to mervisdiamond.com. Again, that's 800-HER-LOVE or go to mervisdiamond.com.
From hook and bullet to policy and science, we're here to discuss and dissect all matters of importance to Montana's rugged landscape and the people and wildlife that call it home. This is Montana Untamed. A little over a month ago, the world watched in horror as fast-moving flames leveled the idyllic oceanside town of Lahaina on the Hawaiian island of Maui. The fire had started just that day, but winds from a distant hurricane swept the flames into a firestorm that killed more than 100 people, making it the deadliest American wildfire in more than a century. Similar things happened around Montana this summer, thankfully with no deaths reported, but there were similarities between them. A new fire grows rapidly, fanned by hot and dry winds, to quickly threaten a town. And that happened as Montana has seen a remarkably quiet season for wildfires by some measures. With me today is Joshua Murdock, outdoors and natural resources reporter at the Missoulian newspaper. So Josh, does a Montana fire like this stick out?
Yeah, there is one fire this year that happened recently, actually, that sticks out to me, and that's the River Road East fire in Paradise. So it's about a little bit more than an hour to hour and a half drive northwest of Missoula here. It's actually right near Quinn's Hot Springs, which is where in early April this year there was that train that derailed and spilled all of the beer into the Clark Fork River. So a lot of people,
which we covered.
Yes. Yeah,
in a previous episode.
A lot of people probably remember seeing that picture that our photographer Ben Smith took of the guy in the float or the drift boat holding up the beer with the train cars in the background. So right in that same area on August 18th, it was otherwise a fairly normal day in Paradise, a little town of a little bit less than 200 people. It's an old railroad town, and freight trains have rolled through there since the 1880s. And so it was a totally normal August day on August 18th, and sometime around 1 o'clock, yet another freight train rolls through town. Totally normal occurrence. They're rumbling through town all day and night. But then right after that, people noticed that just south of the town, on the other side of the Clark Fork River, there's a little column of smoke rising up from the side of the train tracks where the train had just passed. And very quickly, and so that site where that fire had started is about 2,500 feet elevation. And the fire was dispatched at 1:18 in the afternoon. Pretty quickly, flames had raced through timber up the east face of Patrick's Knob, which is a mountain just west of town that's almost 7,000 feet. So the flames climbed 4,200 feet up this mountain within a matter of hours, and then really strong afternoon winds that afternoon and evening blew the fire from that southwest side of the river and Highway 200 of Paradise. The flames jumped all the way over the river, the railroad tracks, the highway, and the town of Paradise to McLaughlin Creek, which is on kind of the east-northeast side of the town of Paradise and the highway and the river, and started racing up that drainage, which is a one-way in, one-way out area full of homes and cabins on McLaughlin Creek Road.
Had they implemented evacuations before it crossed the river?
Right. So this all happened super fast. And I, having not physically been there myself as this played out in just a matter of hours, I know that fire was burning through grass in the valley, kind of bookending the town and encroaching on both ends of the town. It's burning in the mountains on both sides. So I don't know if it was right before that or as they saw that what was coming or as it happened, they did institute a full evacuation of McLaughlin Creek and the town of Paradise. They tried to get as many people out as they could as the highway was passable. At times that meant going north because there were flames surrounding the highway on the south side of town, like between Paradise and Quinn's Hot Springs. But it all happened super fast. I mean, the fire started that afternoon on August 18th, and in less than 12 hours, it had burned 12,000 acres, jumped the river, the whole town and area was evacuated. That happened within hours of this fire starting.
Okay, so it sounds like we have fire on all sides of this town. What was the eventual damage?
Yeah, so more than 50 structures were reported burned, and that included 16 homes. A lot of those were up the McLaughlin Creek drainage, but some of them were in or around Paradise. There was at least one or two homes right on kind of the north end of Paradise, where Highway 200 heads up towards Plains, that burned. The iconic white dairy barn on Highway 200 just south of Paradise, between Paradise and Quinn's, that big white barn that was right on the side of the highway, that was reduced to ash and a foundation. Luckily I haven't seen any reports of injuries or deaths. We covered the paper. I couldn't see anything about any injuries or deaths. And the other local weekly papers that are in the area didn't report any injuries or deaths. But it's hard to pin down exactly how many structures burned and where they were. And I haven't been able to yet confirm, even coming up on a month after the fire, for sure whether there were no injuries or deaths at all. That kind of stuff, unlike, say, fire acreage or growth or firefighting, structures burned and injuries or deaths from a fire are under the purview of the county sheriff, and that's Sanders County Sheriff Sean Fielders. And I have left a slew of voicemails with him over the past few weeks, sent multiple emails. I've reached out to the sheriff's office Facebook page. He has not responded to any messages. I actually visited the sheriff's office in Thompson Falls 2 weeks ago, and an employee said that the sheriff and Under Sheriff Jerry Johnson would be in meetings the entire day and couldn't meet with me. I left my phone number. The employee at the sheriff's office said he would pass that along and have the sheriff give me a call, and he has not given me a call. So for a month now, the sheriff has refused to say anything.
Has he spoken with other media outlets?
It doesn't seem like it. The only times that I've seen him quoted in other newspapers is from a couple comments that he made in the early days of the fire when he spoke at public fire information meetings that the firefighting incident management team held. And they had him come in. That's when he said, we think we've got, a little bit more than 50 structures burned and 16 homes. And he didn't mention anything about injuries or deaths, but yeah, that's where those numbers come from. So that's been, a frustration because a month later, it's actually I haven't been able to confirm, any of those numbers or structures burned, and haven't been able to confirm for sure that there weren't any injuries or deaths reported. So how things played out there in terms of human life safety and private property is still kind of fuzzy because the sheriff seems to be refusing to speak publicly about it.
Right. Yeah, and for folks listening that don't work in this industry, it's not common, but it does happen where you have public officials that choose to just not ever speak with the press. newspapers or TV outlets. But in your reporting, Josh, you reference other fires that, have a similar trajectory or a similar timeline and situation. Will you go into that?
Right. So just like, this isn't the only, what happened in Lahaina in Maui wasn't the only time that we've seen that kind of thing happen around the U.S. The same is true for the River Road East Fire for Montana and the Pacific Northwest. Actually, the same exact day as the River Road East Fire, on August 18th this year, 135 miles to the west, the Gray Fire at Medical Lake was doing a similar thing, just with far more disastrous consequences. So that fire was about 14 miles southwest of Spokane, just a little bit southwest of the airport. And yeah, that started the same day, August 18th, and it quickly blew up to thousands of acres. Unfortunately, that one did kill 2 people, and it also burned at least 240 homes. And that's according to reports from the Spokane Spokesman Review, which covered that fire intensively. And in the Spokesman Review's reporting on the Gray Fire, residents around Medical Lake that they talked to described the same thing that I heard from Paradise residents who I talked to about the River Road East Fire. They described fast-moving flames from a brand new fire, whipped up by strong winds, and all of a sudden it's bearing down on houses and it's engulfing homes. So that was, one person at Medical Lake told the Spokesman Review that it almost sounded like a war zone. All of a sudden it went whoosh, and I had to get out of there. And that mirrors exactly what people in Paradise had told me. One resident, a 75-year-old cowboy who rescues horses named Johnny Thompson, he said when he was driving to his property to get his horses out, I looked out of the window and I couldn't believe it. And he described fire spread all across the mountains on both sides of town. It looked like hell. It looked like we were driving into hell.
Wow.
Yeah. And a few hours before, there was nothing even to worry about. Yeah, it was, as another guy said, who worked as a logger all his life and had seen a lot of wildfire, he said it was wild. I've been through this. He said, I've been through this a bunch of times up in the woods, but not in town.
Right.
And yeah, so, and even, around that kind of Idaho Panhandle, Eastern Washington interface, which is where the Medical Lake Fire was also on August 18th. That's not the only time that has happened there. People at the Gray Fire at Medical Lake last month, such as local officials and longtime residents, they said that fire reminded them of the inland northwest firestorm of October 16th, 1991. So more than 30 years ago. And in that instance, in the middle of fall, 50-mile-an-hour winds blew down power lines all across eastern Washington and northern Idaho, that's how the fire in Lahaina started in August. But in this case, in 91, that ignited more than 80 different wildfires all across eastern Washington and northern Idaho that eventually killed 2 people and burned 112 homes. And, in that case, a lot of the rapid fire spread that was outpacing firefighters, again, happened within hours of these fires starting. Brand new fires just explode and start engulfing homes before anybody can catch up to them. And this is a statement that Spokesman Review reporter Jess Water wrote at that time in 1991. And I had to double check that because it sounded like something I would read or I would write about wildfires today. But this is what he wrote, 32 years ago. The fires overwhelmed rural fire protection systems, already stretched thin by a growing number of people moving to the countryside.
Right. And I mean, this is a unique, not necessarily unique, but, a tragic fire. But, these types of fires or these types of outcomes for fire in the West is becoming more common and more prevalent as the wildland-urban interface and these rural mountainous areas are becoming more developed as people move into them. And, of course, the volatility and length of fires and fire season is increasing with climate change. But there's a huge amount of context that we need to provide for folks on this fire season, that it wasn't all doom and gloom, that it's been a relatively quiet wildfire season in Montana. People have probably noticed a little bit less wildfire smoke, and the wildfire smoke that we did have was primarily from Canada. So can you give people the digest of how Montana's wildfire season went? I think in the beginning of the season they were projecting a pretty average fire season. Is that what we wound up with?
Yeah, it really depends on how you measure it. On one hand, we've had these kind of dramatic fires like the River Road East fire that starts and quickly blows up and evacuates a whole town, burns homes. The Big Knife fire in Arlee in late July, that sparked by lightning. And within hours, it was hundreds of acres in the evening, highly visible from the highway, with, tree torching and spotting. And it was this very visually dramatic fire that a lot of people could see. And those are also fires that, make the news a lot more than, say, a couple 100-acre fire that's burning deep in the wilderness. So, yeah, by some measures, this, there was a lot of activity that people would see either in person or, hear socially or see in our news coverage and other outlets' news coverage because of the nature of those wildfires. But when we look at the actual acreage that burned this year, it was actually a very, very below average year for wildfires in Montana. On average, about 400,000 acres will burn in Montana during a normal wildfire season. Technically 395,000 acres. So that's the average for acres burned by wildfire in Montana. Last year was a relatively quiet year in terms of acreage. 137,000 acres burned. This year so far has been even quieter, with just 114,000 acres burned as of today, September 15th. So that is, that's a fraction of the normal amount of acreage that would burn in Montana during a year. And it really pales in comparison to 2 years ago. In 2021, almost 750,000 acres burned. This year, barely 100,000 acres have burned.
Yeah, and I think in 2019 we hit the million-acre mark. It was either 2019 or 2017. I believe it was 2019.
Yeah, sometime in the past, like five years.
Yeah, and so, that can put it in perspective for folks that, like, this season we, only burned a tenth of, what we've seen wildfires do in, very recent memory.
Yeah. But at the same time, though, there were some other interesting, weather dynamics that occurred in August.
Right.
So August was also significantly hotter than normal. It was the 8th hottest August on record in Missoula. When you average out the daily high and the daily low just to find your overall average temperature across the month, August averaged 70.6 degrees in Missoula. That's 3.5 degrees warmer than normal, so significantly warmer from a meteorological standpoint. Same thing happened up in the northwest corner of the state. Kalispell averaged 66.8 degrees for August, and that's 3.1 degrees normal or warmer than normal.
Right.
But then at the same time, and this is one of the things that contributed to less acreage being burned. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things because this significantly slowed a lot of these raging wildfires. This August was the 8th wettest on record for Missoula.
Right.
Normally, Missoula in August will see just 0.83 inches of precipitation the whole month of August, less than an inch. This August, we saw 2.35 inches of precipitation. And the same thing played out in Kalispell. It was the 7th wettest August on record there. Normally, they would only see 3/4 of an inch of precipitation in August. They got almost 3 inches of precipitation. And so you had this hot, windy August, and we had a hot and dry July. Fuels were drying out. The beginning of August was hot and dry. These fires spark and they blow up really quickly. And then all of a sudden you get this abnormal, 2 days of wetting rain. Part of that was when Hurricane Hillary, pushed its way up here after it made landfall in California and Baja, Mexico. But, we also just had some other weather systems that delivered unusual wetting rains in August that really slowed fire behavior. So that's part of the dynamic that was at play there for kind of a unusual August weather pattern.
Right, but I think the moral of the story, or the lesson to be learned here, is that even in a situation, even in a fire season that is drastically below average, there is still danger to human development and civilization, even when it's a small fire.
Yeah, that is absolutely accurate. And so, it's interesting, Montana definitely doesn't have a ton of homes compared to, say, the state of Washington or Oregon.
Right, Front Range of Colorado.
Right, definitely not compared to California. I mean, these are states, especially, California and stuff, whose populations absolutely dwarf Montana, and so too do the number of homes in these states. They dwarf the number of homes that we have here in Montana. The difference, though, is that, and so this is from one of our previous stories here a few weeks ago. So we did an analysis of data from the U.S. Census Bureau and insurance company data. And we found that even though we have fewer homes than other Western states, Montana actually has the greatest percentage of its homes at risk of wildfire compared to other Western states. So, for example, 14% of California's homes are at risk of wildfire. Only 5% of Washington State's homes are at risk of wildfire. In Montana, 27% of Montana homes are at risk of wildfire. So that is one of the big challenges here, is that, more of our homes, percentage-wise, are at risk of wildfire than other Western states. So what's being done, not only by, forest and government agencies, but also, individual homeowners to protect those 1 in 4 homes that are at risk? Right. So, some things are agreed upon. Some things are a little more controversial to try and tackle this problem. But it's interesting because just like that statement from the news story from the 1991 firestorm that I read, still today, land managers, conservation groups, politicians, and fire officials, they frequently describe increasing fire risk to homes as more people build in the forested landscape of the West and all around Montana. And that's an area that is sometimes described as the wildland-urban interface.
Wooey.
Yep, exactly. And so there's some disagreement depending on who you talk to about what exactly constitutes the wildland-urban interface. Is it the forested area that surrounds a town, or is it anywhere that's forested where people go out and build cabins? So federal and state land managers generally have in recent years committed to a massive campaign of thinning forests across the West with logging and prescribed burning. And Congress has in recent years devoted billions of dollars toward this. And a lot of it's getting directed towards Montana. So the argument, and there is a body of science behind it, says that after a century of logging, after a century of full suppression firefighting where we just try and put out every wildfire as best as we can, as quick as we can, that has led to forests being unnaturally overgrown. They got, whole timber stands where all the trees are the same age and they're way too dense. So now land managers are kind of strategically trying to thin forests to favor fire-tolerant species like ponderosa pine and western larch, and they're trying to mirror what they say are historic conditions that had maybe a little bit more spaced out foliage, and they had regular low-intensity fire that would burn some of the ground fuels, but it could generally move through more or less without being a huge raging stand replacement fire that torches all the trees. So there's a big campaign to take on a lot of that work. The argument is that that if we return to those historic conditions, then the forest will be more resilient to fire. Fire can burn through at low to medium intensity, like they say it used to historically, and then it will pose less of a risk to human development. It'll also, because it's easier to fight fires like that. So that's something that's going on across the West and in Montana. As part of that, the federal government identified about 250 what they call high-risk fire sheds all across the country, and primarily in the West. And so that's where the Secretary of Agriculture has determined, these are our 250 highest risk areas for wildfire. And then Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack, on that, fire shed analysis, gave the Forest Service the authority to kind of fast track projects aimed at reducing wildfire risk in those fire sheds through the public process by saying that this is an emergency action because it's a forestry project in one of these high-risk fire sheds, of which there are many in Montana. So we're seeing that right now with things like the Bitterroot Front Project. The Bitterroot Front Project encompasses multiple of these high-risk fire sheds. The project area stretches from about Florence, just south of Lolo, actually, all the way down to Darby and Sula, near Trapper Peak. And it involves a whole combination of thinning and prescribed burning in various areas along the Bitterroot Front between private development in the valley and the wilderness boundary up higher in the mountains. And recently, Forest Service Chief Randy Moore used emergency authorization to take a bulk of the forest treatment work of the Bitterroot Front project and kind of fast track that. The emergency authorization allows the Forest Service to skip the step of taking formal objections to the project before it finally implements the project. Normally, as they're going through the environmental analysis, part of the public process for any sort of project that the Forest Service or another federal agency would undertake, they have to take public comment at a bunch of different points throughout that. Then, when they are ready, they're just short of actually finally approving a proposed project, anybody who previously commented on the project is allowed to file an objection to the project and say, hey, we commented and we still don't like what we see. We're filing a formal objection. Before the Forest Service can actually move forward with the project, they have to respond to all of those objections. Once they do that, then they can sign a record of decision and they can implement the project, actually do the work. The emergency authorization, people are still able to submit comments, but there's no more objection period. So comments will be submitted, and then after that, the Forest Service can move forward with signing a record of decision and implementing the project. There is no longer that objection period anymore. So the Forest Service is doing that with the Bitterroot Front project. They're also doing that with another new project just north of Seeley Lake. Stretches from the Seeley Lake area all the way up to Summit Lake on Highway 83, which is the roughly around the Lolo National Forest and Flathead National Forest boundary. And so that's another one. And that's one that they actually describe as, the Seeley Lake and Highway 83 wildlife urban interface project. It's an area that is dotted with cabins, developed recreation sites like trailheads and campgrounds. And you've got the town of Sealy Lake right there on the south end of the project, and you've got a major highway running through it. So that's another project that just got emergency authorization where they're going to do a lot of this work to reduce wildfire risk on the landscape. That work isn't universally accepted. There is a body of science behind it that supports the efficacy of that work and the historic forest conditions that they say they're going to return the forest to. And thinning fuels and creating fuel breaks is also a primary way that wildland firefighters do their jobs and contain wildfires. On the other hand, there are other studies that question kind of these historic forest conditions and question the idea that the landscape around the Northwest and western Montana was dominated by this regular low severity fire. Other studies have suggested that it was common historically to have raging stand replacement fires. There was fire of a variety of different severities across the landscape, sometimes full stand replacement. And so that is a competing theory that also has a body of science behind it. And people who are critical of these forest treatments, they say that no, thinning out the forest, allowing more wind and more sunlight to get through there, that's going to allow for more rapid wildfire spread. If the wind can blow faster through these thinned out forests, it's going to fan the flames. If more sunlight and wind can permeate these thinned out forests, that's going to further dry out fuels. You're actually going to accelerate the fires rather than create more resiliency. And they also worry about habitat impacts. All of this work requires human presence. A lot of it requires road building or improvement of existing roads and road usage of closed roads. And there's a lot of science that shows that that can harm protected species like grizzly bear or bull trout.
Right.
So there is a debate, about the efficacy or the possible harm of those treatments. But land managers, by and large, and the federal government and certainly Montana state government are definitely pursuing a campaign of forestry projects and forest treatments based on, the body of science that supports those. And so they're moving ahead with that, and that's taking place all across the nation. Some things, though, that are less controversial, though, is this idea of, creating a defensible space around homes, especially homes that are in the wildland-urban interface. Clearing brush from around homes, clearing flammable items from around homes. It can be simple as don't pile your firewood up against your house. Keep it farther away. Don't let a bunch of brush grow up against your house. And also, there's a move to what they say hardening homes to embers. A lot of the home ignitions aren't necessarily from flames burning right up to the edge of a house. It's from embers and sparks getting into homes. Some of the burned homes that we saw in the River Road East fire were surrounded by green grass and living trees, but embers got into the homes and then lit the homes on fire. So, being able to prevent that can reduce a lot of home ignitions. But then one of the things that's the trickiest is people keep building in the forest. And people have property in the forest. They have rights to build on their property in the forest. But there might be a wildfire there. So that's, the challenge that was mentioned in that story 32 years ago, and it's the challenge that we're dealing with today.
Right, and the challenge we'll deal with 30 years from now. Well, thanks, Josh. I don't want to jinx ourselves, but given the long-range forecast for the rest of the season, my guess is we're probably not going to have too much wildfire activity, and there's always the possibility of things sparking. But thanks for coming on. I guess until next fire season.
Yeah.
Montana Untamed is a podcast from the newsrooms of Lee Enterprises Montana newspapers. Visit any of our websites or subscribe wherever podcasts are found.